Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Health Series. I have been trying to decide what topic to discuss this week, and I'm going to roll with the theme of the coronavirus. So, as you are all probably aware, the world is currently going crazy over this COVID-19, which, fair enough, it is a bit of a crisis. Things are getting a little hectic at the supermarket. People are definitely worried. However, I would like to talk about today how can I say this? I'd love to just say that exercise can prevent coronavirus, but that's definitely not true. So I'm going to talk about how prevention is key, which means basically I'm going to talk about how exercise can actually help boost your immunity if you are doing it the right way and following some guidelines. So basically, if you had a pretty good immune system and you came across said coronavirus, maybe you would be fine, which most people will be. It's those who have a very low or suppressed immune system that seem to be the ones that are actually not so good at coping with said virus. So let's talk today about the immune system. Number one, we're going to go over that. And number two, the benefits of exercise in terms of boosting the immune system in order to offset risks associated. Actually, we're going to talk about upper respiratory tract infections. So stay tuned for the rest of this episode because it's juicy and it's going to teach you about prevention being pretty important in terms of health management and how exercise is involved. All right, so I've gone back to the old cheat sheet version of the videos because this is a little hard to understand for anyone that doesn't really know much about this. I had to actually go back over some long-term study notes back from uni, plus do a little bit of extra research on learning about the immune system. So it's going to be pretty basic for everybody out here to understand. And also because the deeper I delved, the more I was like, this is probably a little bit beyond my knowledge. So first things first, we're going to talk about two different immune systems. You have your innate immune system and your adaptive immune system. So this one here is basically things that you're born with inside your body. Your first line of defense for most any type of infection, antigen or bacteria that comes in, let's just call them antigens, is going to be addressed with this first line of defense. So this is things like your skin. We have a very good barrier here known as your skin, which stops pretty much anything from coming in or attempts to. It has like its defense mechanism. And then you have chemical barriers. So this is going to be found in like your mucosal membranes or like any sort of chemical within those mucosal membranes that you have that are going to basically chemically attack any sort of foreign antigen that it's going to come across and try and capture it before it even gets into your bloodstream or into your systems. So in your nose and in your mouth, you've got all these basically enzymes in there. They're going to eat everything up. You've got that through your stomach lining, your stomach acid, et cetera, as you basically inhale, ingest, whatever. Second line of defense, if it gets through those, is your cells. You have cells inside your body that are designed to basically attack and kill off any foreign matter. So the basic three cells that I'm going to cover here are your neutrophils, natural killer cells or your NK cells, and your macrophages. So basically this guy here eats everything and dies. He chews it up and then kills himself. So basically that's how any foreign antigen that comes in, foreign object, will go through one of these phases depending on how it attacks your body. However, neutrophils will eat and then die. Natural killer cells, these guys kill other cells that basically present any sort of foreign infection or attacked by some sort of bacteria or virus, whatever. Antigen, that's right, we're referring to them as antigen. So they basically come along to, say, this little guy over here who's another cell, recognizes that it's infected through however it displays some proteins on its outside. Basically, it tells you it's infected by how it presents what's inside it on its outside. It's pretty cool how it does that. However, this natural killer cell comes along, pokes it, puts some enzymes in there, breaks it all apart so it attacks, and then this guy basically dies off. Then you've got your macrophages who eat everything and spit it out. So this is kind of like Pac-Man coming along, eats the antigen, goes in, chews it all up, breaks it down, spits it back out. Then this guy would probably come along, eat it and die. That's how sort of it works. These are your three basic cells that pretty much cover your innate system. Now, let's talk about your adaptive immune system. This here is, I want to say slower. This guy's pretty fast. Identifies and kills pretty quickly. This is slower. So this system here is how vaccinations sort of work. So basically, if you got an infection, it requires, a virus, let's say virus. We're talking about virus because we're kind of adapting this to COVID-19. So you got a virus and you have no antibodies within you that are basically able to kill said virus yet. So your body, your adaptive immune system here is designed to basically go along, meet said new antigen and say, oh, hey mate, how you going? Like, let me suss you out and work out how I've got to kill you in order to not let you kill my body. And then it basically remembers what it did in order to kill it, and then stores that for next time it comes along and meets the same infection or virus or antibody. So it's got like a memory associated with it. It has two different types or segments of the adaptive immune system. Your first part is your humoral, which basically means it's going to create the antibodies required to kill the antigen that has come into your body. So this is done through what we call the B cells. The B cells go along. There's a couple of different types, but I'm trying to keep it pretty simple. And they decide whether or not it's a friend or a foe. So if your cell is not infected or you have a foreign sort of protein that comes in and it's not really a problem, it's your friend, keeps carrying along and does its thing. If it's a foe and it recognizes it as being problematic, each little B cell has specific little antibodies attached to the outside of it. All of them are a little bit different. So it will float around, or one of them will eventually find this foreign antigen that comes in and will trigger an immune response so that it will bind to it. This is your little antigen. This is your B cell, comes along. It's like, oh yeah, I've got an antigen on that. Binds to it, basically. Then it, what does it do then? This triggers the immune response. So this B cell here now multiplies and clones itself and basically teaches all of these or puts the same code and instructions in these other B cells that are coming along to go, okay, we need to basically do something about this. So it develops two different types of cells. You've got your fighter cells and your memory cells that are basically cloned from this B cell. The fighter cells will surround the antigen and trap it so that it can't actually do anything to the rest of the body. And then you've got the memory cells which go, oh, I better remember how to do this for next time. So it stores the genetic code that's going to teach or basically get pulled back out of the system when the same antigen comes back 10 years later or however. And that's how this here becomes the whole introduction from the B cell to the antigen is now faster for the next time that it comes around. So you'll always notice that if you get sick from something, the next time round, it's not as bad because your immune system can remember what it did and attack it a little bit quicker. So these little fighter cells here, once they've surrounded the antigen, they basically signal, or the innate cells, to come and kill the antigen. So then these guys are all like, oh, our turn to get involved, and they come along and basically do their job and kill. So that's how the first part of the adaptive system works. Now, the second part is your cellular response. Now, this here is when all of this hasn't really worked very well yet, and the foreign antigen has actually entered into your cell. So it's no longer floating in its blood system your bloodstream by itself. It's now entered and affected cells. So this is basically where a cell, which is these T cells, these are your killer cells, or they're the ones that are going to basically get rid of the infection or the virus, start to search for the infected cells and kill them. So any cell that's in your body basically has this system, apart from pretty much red blood cells, but most of them have this system of when something comes along and binds to them, or it Inside the cell, it generates proteins that basically get put onto the outside of the cell and signal to other cells whether or not what's happening inside that cell is a good thing or a bad thing. So in the case where a cell is infected with an antigen, the cell will produce these proteins as like a red flag that come up and get presented on the outside of the cell, and basically will tell these T cells, which we call, and especially these cytotoxic T cells, which is one type of T cells, and the natural killer cell, this is also how this guy kills everybody, that it's infected and it's not working, and it needs to be like, it's basically saying, kill me, I'm infected, help. So the T cell recognizes this and basically goes and kills it. So that's what its job does. Then you've got this other type of cell called a helper T cell, which basically will also see that there's a problem if it can bind to a certain cell, and it will recognize that there's an issue. Can't actually kill it, but it will basically signal and trigger this response to come along and do something about it. So maybe the natural killer cell will come along and do its thing, inject with enzymes and break it down and kill it. So that's basically like the last resort, right? But all of this requires that adaptive system, which is like the memory of how to kill this cell or this particular antigen, which is how vaccines are developed. So the vaccines would give you some sort of specific or you basically, when you get a vaccine, it's like a non-strong version of the actual antigen injected into you, so that you then develop this memory system of being able to fight that particular problem or the virus, infection within your body, so that you actually can cope with it a lot better next time you are exposed to it. So in the whole COVID-19, no one actually has a vaccine for this yet, which is why most people tend to become infected by it. That's how your immune system very basically works. And now I really want to address how this system can be improved, or how exercise can actually benefit this and make it, I want to say, stronger or enhance it. So let's flip over. Oh gosh. We got the effects of exercise. So we're going to be jumping around a little bit here. Actually, maybe I'll just tear this off. Sort of probably should have prepared this earlier, but look at that. I hate this. Oh, I just want to cut it off. It's so ugly. So exercise. Basically, when you do a single bout of moderate intensity exercise, that's up here. This is the bit of cheat notes for me to remember what I need to tell you, and also so that you can screenshot this and remember if you want to. But the moderate intensity exercise is basically during that, which I want to say that moderate intensity exercise is usually around, let's say between like 40 to 60% of your heart rate max, or intensity like in terms of intensity, it's between like 40 to 60% of your maximal capacity. So if you're on a 1 to 10 scale, which I usually work with, you're kind of sitting like a 6 out of 10, probably something like that in terms of intensity. And you're doing it for like an hour or less, nothing more than that, because that's going to stem into this section here, which is a bit more intense. So what happens is that you get an increase in your immune response during a moderate intensity bout. So you get an increased circulation of these cells. So in particular, the neutrophils and the natural killer cells will increase and circulate from your tissues into your bloodstream and start doing like their job, basically. They start to increase in how effective they are and their function. You also get an increase in anti-inflammatory cytokines, which means these little guys here are anything that runs around and causes less inflammation or stops inflammation from happening. And you get an increase in that in your bloodstream, which means that any sort of inflammation that you have going around, which is very closely linked with immune problems, is going to be combated, basically. So you get this every single time you do a moderate bout of exercise, which overall in the long term gives you an increased what we call immunosurveillance effect, which basically means like you're getting this extra surveillance, like your body is now going, ooh, are there any little pathogens or antigens that I need to actually look at and see whether or not is going to cause me any problems every single time you exercise. And over time, this enhances your overall immune defense activity. So you get activity on your immune system basically after or every day. If you're exercising, you get this every day. So instead of just having these cells sit in their tissues and not really do that much in terms of like surveilling the blood until there's actually a foreign antigen, it's coming out every single time that you're exercising, and it's having a look around and basically deciding whether or not it needs to do anything about it. So you build like a bit of a stronger immune system in terms of its activity here. You also, during small bouts of exercise, you get a reduction in your stress hormone cortisol. Now, when cortisol in your blood level is high, it can cause and wreak havoc in so many different ways, and it can also increase the chances of you basically getting ill and sick. There's a lot of stress-related illness out there, so a reduction in stress and or in your stress hormone, which is cortisol, is also going to help basically increase your immune activity or enhance your immune system and stop you from getting so ill. Now, if we talk about excessive heavy exertion, so this is like, let's say over an hour, very, very high intensity, and often is in regards to like marathon type events. So things where you're extreme or you're overtraining every single day, you're in super high intensity over an hour, you're basically doing a lot of work. So in this type of exercise, so you get an increased stress response. So your cortisol levels are now through the roof. You also have increases in inflammation, which is linked to so many lifestyle diseases today. Inflammation is the cause of so many problems. So you don't want to increase inflammation or stress any more than you have to. I mean, they are quite important in terms of like health, but overproduction of this is a problem. And that happens during excessive heavy exertion. We also get an excessive damage to the muscle tissues. So when you're training all the time and you're overtraining and you're working really hard, or you're running endurance, you're an endurance athlete trying to run marathons or Ironmans or things like that, or just generally overtraining too much, you get this really strong innate immune response. So all of this here has to come down and deal with all the muscle damage that you've gone through and try and break all of the dead tissues down that you're causing from your overtraining. So you get this basically like this little, over use of the immune system all the time in your recovery. It's always working. So becomes a little bit in demand, high demand here. So they also talk about there's been research, they call this the open window theory. So basically when you overtrain very extensively after your training regime or your training session, let's say, you get like this window of basically like super suppressed immune system, which is like either hours to days after your exercise, depending on how hard and fast you go or how much work you put in and how much damage you do. And in that window, you have a risk of basically, if there is any antigens in your body or bacteria, infection, then you will have issues basically fighting that. Your immune system is now suppressed and compromised. So you are at risk of getting infections in that window. There was lots of studies done by marathon runners who basically in versus controls who were not obviously running marathons. They were sleeping basically in the same room and doing the same type of thing, except for either exercising or non-exercising. And they had a very big increased risk in terms of like upper respiratory tract infections with those who were overtraining, just based on their response to exercise. So you can see how basically this is what we call a J curve. And it means that if you're a sedentary person and you have like a normal risk of upper respiratory tract infections, and as you exercise, moderately and not for over an hour, you are reducing your risk of contracting these respiratory tract infections by 40 to 50%. That is absolutely huge. Like if you are regularly exercising. Now, if you overdo that and you go up and up and up and up and up and up and up, 2 to 6 times increase in risk of contracting an upper respiratory tract infection with super heavy overtraining and exertion. So there's a fine line between doing the right amount and not overtraining, right? So sometimes less is more. This is what I always promote. Less sometimes is more beneficial for you rather than overtraining all the time. So you can see how a moderate intensity exercise has an increased ability to help aid and build your immune system, and in particular its activity, and a few of the cells that are involved in that, which we went over earlier. And the excessive heavy exertion actually causes the opposite response. You get more issues with suppressive immune system. The cells aren't they're not responding in the same way that they would here. So it's very important that you're not overtraining, especially at this time now where you are or could be at risk of contracting said virus, COVID-19, wrong year, or just in general. So that's basically the immune system and the effect of exercise. The most important take-home message that I actually wanted to give you from this video is that often more than not, prevention is key. So as an exercise physiologist, our job is to promote our management of chronic health conditions and prevention of those. So if you were someone that was regularly exercising and going to the gym or going walking and not overtraining or excessively training, your immune system would be super strong, as long as you're also eating well, sleeping well, hydrating well, making healthy lifestyle choices. And if you were to come across some sort of bacteria, virus, infection, blah, 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 antigen, all those fancy words, you would probably have a pretty good immune system in order to fight it, as opposed to someone who's either quite sedentary, not exercising at all and has a suppressed immune system, or not as strong because they're not as healthy. Or if you were overtraining and you're doing too much all the time, it's really important that you actually let your body rest. You're not overtraining and pushing it too much, as you will cause that opposite effect of having a suppressed immune system. So because we are currently undergoing COVID-19 and everyone is really worried and not going to the gym, I understand that the germs are around and people are really, really worried about that. However, if you are out and about just going for a walk and doing some very moderate exercise and you're not at risk at this point in time of having a lower immune system, probably going to help you out. But you should have been doing it earlier. So for the next outbreak of some crazy flu that we're going to go through in the next, who knows how many years, 10 years, 100 years, we're liable to have some sort of other pandemic. If you get onto it now and exercise, maybe your immune system will be strong enough to deal with it. How good would that be? Anyway, I hope this is helpful. I hope that you're all staying safe in this time and making good decisions. Don't panic. Stay healthy. Stay happy. Worst case scenario, you can exercise in your home for 2 weeks every day. You'll get really fit and healthy if you have to go into quarantine. Otherwise, stay tuned for the next couple of episodes. Bye.